All right, everyone, thank you for your patience. We are now live. So I welcome you to the Tuesday, March 5th, 2024 Elyria Planning Commission meeting. The roll call, Mr. Aiden. Mr. Battle.
Here.
Mr. Hubbard.
Here.
Mr. Underko.
Here.
Mr. Panowski. Here. Brubaker here. Mr. Tedrow.
Here.
Here. Great. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as distributed from February 6, 2024. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Battle. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Tedrow. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. There is no, item 4, no miscellaneous correspondence. Item 5, no new business. Item 6, no old business. So we'll jump right to item 7, which is a public hearing. And per the Administrative Legal Counsel, we will start with 2023-100097. Villas of the Valley, 1100 Gulf Road, Elyria, Ohio, 44035, requesting a new subdivision. That being said, Mr. Farkas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. The memo that I passed out will serve multi-purposes as I address the subdivision and the multitude of variance requests. The proponents are requesting multiple variances and to establish a new subdivision on 32.45 acres of land at the address listed. The site is proposed to have 219 homes consisting of 3 units, duplexes, and single-family homes that will utilize the residential plan unit development standards as required by Chapter 1177 of the Codified Ordinance. Note, conditional use was granted by Planning Commission on 2/6/24, case number 2023-001-00109 for the proposed residential plan unit development in a residential multi-household low-density district. Zoning. I've listed some of the zoning requirements for the residential plan unit development district for the board's use and future reference. Section 1177.05 of the development standards goes into the requirements of lots, acreage, density, frontages, etc. 1177.07 goes into the yard requirements for the setbacks from the public street, right-of-way, buildings, side yards for 2 units to 1 unit to single, etc. The building requirements for the properties are as follows. The maximum height shall be 35 feet for all principal buildings. The maximum building for accessories per code is 15. Staff findings. I've completed my review and offer the following. I'm not going to read the specifics in regards to the zoning requirements as we're just addressing the subdivision. Particularly, I want to indicate on number 1, the minimum open space requirement shall be 30% for the total land area for a new subdivision, exclusive of public and private streets per Codified Ordinance 1177-06C. The plan submitted appears to consider the adjacent abutting acreage of the golf course, 163 acres, of which is not incorporated into the proposed subdivision, consisting of 32.45 acres. And it considers it as part of the open space. I indicated variance was needed. I'm going to jump down to my recommendations. Now keep in mind the recommendations are considering the overall requests of the variances in subdivision. Due to the compact design of the subdivision and number of variances being requested, the proposal does not meet with the spirit and intent of the zoning code and would set a precedent if passed. I therefore will rely on the board's discretion moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Farkas. And just for the purposes of why we started with 9.7 versus 9.8, is brought to my attention that we will need to pass the request for the new subdivision before we can move into the variances. So that's why we went to 97 first. Ms. Scott, anything from community development?
Through you, no additional comment at this time.
Thank you. Engineer Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in regards to the overall subdivision, just a brief description, just so the panel is aware. Obviously, I believe everyone is aware that the proposed subdivision is partially in a floodplain. The developer has provided us documentation to follow the engineering requirements as far as moving it above the floodplain, as far as the lowest levels, so it will all be above the base flood elevation. The only portion of the overall development that will be within I should back up for a second. The city engineer's office requiring an additional 2 feet on top of the original base flood elevation. So that's kind of a safety factor that we put in there to limit the probability of the area flooding as far as where the houses are in the lower section. So that's the base flood elevation is 615. The roadway coming in, there is a small portion of that will be within that is at the 615 level or higher, but it will be below the 617, which is the additional 2 feet. But the rest of the roads will be all above the 617 or higher, including the emergency access road. The sanitary sewers will be built to city standards. They will become the city's responsibility to maintain in the future, as well as 2 lift stations that are included in the overall subdivision. Likewise, for the water lines, those will be required to be built to city standards as well. And they will also become the city's to maintain in the future. Storm sewers will rest on the HOA. Some of the storm sewer information provided in the plans. The developer did not provide me with all the storm sewers for the entire project. The majority of it is provided, but the lower half does not have the storm sewers identified, as well as the dryways upward and down the hills with that, as well as water quality. I have not been provided any water quality information yet. This is stuff that the developer will be required to provide us. Provided you move forward with this, we will make sure that they provide this information before construction starts. The roadways, once again, are all private. Without getting into the variances yet, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of what the overall subdivision will essentially look like. There will be a 3rd lane. I have been provided with some preliminary plans as far as that turn lane on Gulf Road, which I would say that they're working in the right direction. So I guess with that, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to provide.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Assistant Chief Galt.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. There's no comments at this time from Fire Department.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Corna, anybody from your team have any comments that you'd like to make before we move on?
Yes. My name is Robert Corna. I'm the architect and planner for the project. My address is 2057 Center Ridge Road, Rocky River, Ohio, which is my office. I've pretty much been through almost 2 years of working on this plan. It's over 2 years since we started trying to identify a final plan that satisfies everyone. Continuous meetings with fire, engineering, and everybody involved with the project. And I think in every case, this wasn't a simple project by any means when we started it. There's a lot of things that were involved in trying to get to where we are today. One of the particular problems that existed with the property from its inception was the fact that it is partially in a floodplain, and we needed to work out with engineering that there will be nothing built in the floodplain in the final plans that are submitted today. The floodplain issues are pretty much, at this point, satisfied. There's some water quality that needs to be done, and I think we're going to be using more of a natural resource of natural grasses to provide that requirement. The secondary road access travels through the golf course through an easement, and that provides, actually we have 3 means of egress, but that means of egress ties into Golf Road, and it ties into Golf Road with it'll have a chain fence there that's only used for emergencies. So the fire department would have access to it. We've designed it with, all the turning radiuses that are needed. The grades will not be more than 10%, so it meets the requirements for a fire truck to gain access if it ever needed it. And, but we do have two means of egress that are satisfactory to the fire department. We have a developer, Harvanian Homes, who's going to build their homes there on individual lots. And it was decided that their community would not be a restricted 55-year community. It's open to anybody, but it's designed and very acceptable to senior housing. They have custom plans that can be single-floor master bedrooms, or they can have two-floor residential for families. So it meets both requirements of whatever buyers want to come in and live here in Elyria. We've chosen Harvanian over other developers. Harvania is a national builder, and in this market that we're facing now with higher interest rates and higher costs, they know how to pretty much monitor and wave themselves through this kind of market and still feel confident in the project. We did have kind of a lull in our development when we decided to move forward with Jack Nicklaus to design the course, because we felt that we needed a higher quality golf course to attract a higher quality buyer. And over $12 million has been invested in that golf course, and it is pretty much one of the finest golf courses in Ohio, and it has received some national recognition. So the accomplishment of the course is there, so the stage is finally set for housing and marketing. And everyone involved on this side of the fence feels very confident, even though interest rates are a little high. They probably will come down a little bit, but the market is still there. Our market is probably going to be higher into people that are getting out of their larger homes, and this is going to be a second home, maybe that they would have in Florida, but they would live here and somewhere else, but they're also can have their permanent residence here. So pretty much the plans that we've developed thus far are far beyond preliminary. They're pretty close to finish stage. One of the things that have come up recently, we had a traffic study done, and the traffic study was all about the turning lane, and the requirement was really for later on, but we've kind of worked with the administration. The administration feels strongly that that turning lane should go in the beginning. So we've compromised and been able to arrange ourselves so that we will do the turning lane up front rather than wait. Originally, we were going to wait for 85 units, but we're going to go ahead and have it done up front. I know there's been questions about construction traffic while the turning lane is being developed and why simultaneously the golf course development is happening. There's this theory out there that there's going to be dozens and thousands of trucks and all this traffic. For this subdivision, it happens in phases, and we hope to close the golf course in September and start our grading. There'll probably be 3 major pieces of equipment that'll be on the property. There is, in our engineering plan, there's no dirt being removed from the property. So there'll be no movement of large dirt and large trucks coming in and out of that entrance. All the dirt's going to remain on the property, and we're pretty much moving it around and adjusting it so that we've balanced the grading so that we can do our retention ponds, whatever we have to do, dig our foundations. So there won't be any trucks moving in and out of that entrance, moving a lot of dirt. The only movement of traffic will be moving the equipment in and moving the equipment out, and of course employees. And most of this construction will happen in September. Hopefully we can start in September if we can get through the planning stage. And that construction will happen really from September through next May. The golf course will be closed that entire time up until the end of March. So you won't have a conflicting, combining golf course traffic with the construction traffic. The majority of the large part of the constructions will be done early spring before the golf course reopens. That's the plan. And the final piece to the property would be the paving itself. And the paving would be, you know, concrete trucks coming in and laying concrete. And that would be a brief moment in time. It's not like it's going to be consistent. Paving will happen probably within 2.5 to 3 week period, and that's concrete trucks actually putting the paving down. So wanted to be clear that the project is designed so that we can get the grading done first and then get the sewers and water in. And again, there's not going to be large traffic coming in and out for that. There'll be some material deliveries, but nothing that's beyond what would be normal. I think the whole concept is to work on the secondary road immediately at the simultaneous time that we start, so that they would both, the secondary road would be pretty much completed by the time we get into, really look at May for actually housing development to actually start occupancy, or actually to start construction on housing. So I would say the housing would probably be delivered sometime in summer of next year when people will actually start living there, and the construction would be completed at that time. We are phasing the developments. We're not going to do everything at one time. There's 140 lots in the plan that have been designed for Harvanian to build their single-family homes. We have designed a phase of 24 units per phase, even though there's 140 units. So there's only 24 units happening per time, and that would probably be a 6-month period, depending on sales. So we're only doing 24 at a time. That means 24 units with roads. We'll probably end up putting most of the sanitary and the storm lines in up front, but the housing will be done in smaller phases. I think the idea of the secondary road from an engineering standpoint, we've been asked to do finished or close to finished engineering drawings, which we submitted to the engineer. I think I'll let him speak to that, but I think he's close to being pretty much satisfied that the concept works. And the retaining wall, we know we have to put a retaining wall in. And we don't have to go into the creek. We don't have to amend the floodplain. So we can deal with the conditions that are there now. So it's not like it's going to be a difficult process to put that widening in. We have decided not to go to the east where there's a hill, and you did all that work last year. Everything is going to go to the west, and we're going to contribute golf course land to make that widening happen. So everything will be happening towards the west. Everything that was been done towards the east, the drainage, is going to stay in place. So a pretty simple move to use the golf course land and move it to the west. So that plan has been done, engineered, surveying's been done, it's been submitted. So I guess the first part of our agenda today would be talking about the golf course being used for open space. In 2013, we had an approval of the project based on more of a multifamily development. There were fourplexes, and there was we changed in the process we've changed that we felt that Elyria would be better off having for sale housing. And that's why we changed, and we felt that the Nicholas course was important to do that, so the course needed to be upgraded, so it took longer than we anticipated. But that course is getting completed. But during that period of time, a lot of the dirt had been moved, so the grading that's there now is pretty close to what the final grade is going to be, so there won't be a ton of grading changes being done. All the trees were taken down that need to be taken down, and the stumps were removed, so there's not going to be tree removal, that's done and out of the way. The roads themselves up the hill have been preliminary graded, and they have been stoned, including the secondary road. We just have to, because of the new requirement, we have to raise, engineering wants us to raise the floodplain level 2 feet. So the only thing we have to do now is we have to raise those roads 2 feet, but they're already in place as far as the grading is concerned. So there's not as much physical giant activity that needs to happen from this point on. We need to do some grading, then we need to put our sewers and roads in, and again, we're doing it in phases. So I guess the first part of our agenda today would be to talk about the open space requirement. Using the golf course, which we had, there's 200 acres there. And the 200 acres of the golf course are owned by one person, Janet Wang. So it's one owner. In the process of where we planned from the beginning was we had approved the fact that it would be treated as 200 acres because the golf course has been deeded and there's been restrictions put on it where nothing could ever be built on the golf course ever. So the golf course land is restricted from any kind of future development. The only development that could possibly happen is what we're developing today. And we're actually putting that caveat, and already have put that caveat in writing where the land is dedicated for open space. Even if the golf course should not exist, which I doubt if a Jack Nicklaus golf course would ever get grown over, but even if it ever happened in time, it would just still remain open space no matter what would ever happen. So the other condition that's important to understand is the amount of acreage that we're developing. There is a unit count of 227 units which are allowed with the amount of acreage we're actually building on. We're building less units than that demand, so we're under that demand. The only thing that we're using the golf course is for open space. And, that open space doesn't include the river. We have a river. We have everything that's on our land. So there's plenty of open space to meet that requirement. So that's pretty much my presentation for where we're at. I don't know, do we need to put everything up? Can we put it up? That's what I do. Okay, well, they're trying to get it up. Well, we can move ahead. I'd love to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Corner. Just for the purpose of the committee, keep in mind we are part of the first phase of this morning's meeting is 2023-100097, which is specific to the request for the new subdivision. The other variances would come provided 097 is passed or accepted by this committee. So with that being said, I would ask any questions or comments from the committee. Mr. Hubbard?
I guess I have a couple questions. First for Mr. Farkas, I believe in your report you noted that some concerns over this setting a precedence. Do we have any other developments in the city or in the area that would be similar to this in terms of density and some of the concerns addressed in your report?
Mr. Chair, through you, God bless you. This particular subdivision is asking for a multitude of variances, which the variances for other subdivisions are not uncommon. We typically get single requests for side yard reductions. We may get a request for a driveway extension, et cetera. But as a bundle package of open space requirement, front yard, rear yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, all these are not common in subdivisions. We don't have them as a whole. The nearest I can akin this to is Mr. Yost's subdivision that he has out on West Ridge. That one, he did request a higher density requirement, but it was inconsequential to the overall subdivision percentage-wise.
And I also had a question for Mr. Schneider. You indicate that a lot of the roadways and that sort of thing, I think, or at least some of the roadways would be close to the floodplain, or that some of them are a couple feet above, and then others or portions of the roadway might be close. potentially, how often might we consider, or might that impact the ability to either get at that lift station, do maintenance, or what potential problems are we going to get into down the road, given the fact that, at least during my lifetime, I've seen multiple times when that clubhouse was an island? Is this something that we never expect to have a problem? Is this something that might be a problem once every 10 years, 5 years? What are we thinking?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The base flood elevation is based off the 100-year storm, which is essentially a 1% chance. It's not technically, people might think, happens once every 100 years. It's a 1% chance of a storm happening that would basically give enough water to reach that certain level. The lift station, one lift station's up high. The one that's down low will also be set above the base flood elevation, and actually above the plus the 2 feet. So everything we are going to require is going to be above the base flood plus 2. The only portion that is that culvert going into the golf course right there, little bit of concrete portion where the wall is. Majority of the concrete the culvert is actually above the base flood elevation. It's when you get further in where the stone wall kind of ties into the asphalt is where we run into that right at the base flood elevation, which will need to be verified during construction as well to make sure that we don't have any issues. Everything they do in the floodplain has to be verified at the end of construction, as well as they will be required to have certificates for the properties that are built down there stating that they are above the base flood elevation, so that it's an insurance thing. So those will be required as well.
Mr. Hubbard, any follow-up questions? Mr. Farkas?
Mr. Chair, thank you. To piggyback off of what John's indicating, from a building code perspective, the 2019 Residential Code of Ohio kicks in regards to homes constructed in the floodplain. We typically don't get these types of structures because everyone's just afraid of building in a floodplain. A 2-foot grade elevation is something to consider, because when you raise soil 2 feet, that is not virgin ground anymore. That is disturbed soil that is prone to settlement. When they dig their footings and foundations, of course, they'll have to go below that mark, but the areas that will be subject to settlement are the concrete slabs or anything of that nature if they do a slab-type home. So just food for thought.
Thank you, Mr. Farkas.
I'd like to add one thing. When we started this whole program of investing $12 million in the golf course, at that time we had the open space had already been approved. But one thing that is different today is that we had the floodplain study was at 615. That was the elevation of the 100-year flood. Engineering department has required us to build everything 2 feet above that. So everything that's being submitted now is actually 2 feet above the floodplain elevation. That's the 100-year floodplain, and that was a requirement of engineering. It's a costly change, but we have it in our drawings. Everything has been accommodating that nothing is below that elevation. But I might want everybody to sorry I can't show you the drawing up there, but 90% of the units are up high, way out of the floodplain. Up on top of the hill, they're like 40 feet above the floodplain, and they look down into the valley. The only ones that we're talking about, as you come in the entrance, there's 40 townhouses that are partially in the floodplain, partially not. Most of them, only 12 of them are in below 615. So only 10 of the total units are below 615, which will be raised up. But we are raising them 2 feet higher at a request of the engineering department. So we're well above the 100-year floodplain. So I just want to make everybody clear that most of the units are up on top, safe, way above the river, and it's only affecting the ones that are down in the entrance. And we have accommodated that by nothing is going to be built in the floodplain, and nothing will be built below the elevation that they've requested, which is 2 feet above the floodplain.
Thank you,
That
Mr. Corn.
includes roads, that includes everything, will be above that floodplain.
Thank you, Mr. Corn. Mr. Hubbard?
I would be curious, and maybe this would be a question for Mr. Farkas to begin with, based upon the comments from Mr. Corna. If the buildings are built well above the floodplain, are the access roads or the ways that the residents would typically get to those buildings also included that far above the floodplain, or are we gonna wind up with a place where you have a really nice home that can, view a flooded area that you can't get to, or we can't get to?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll have to defer to Mr. Schneider in regards to the elevations of that proposed road. Thank you.
Yes, to you, Mr. Chairman. All the roads will be at 617 or higher. That is our stipulation. So I'm not saying you can't have a 500-year storm where you have those issues. When you go back in history and look at the great flood that we had, and that was largely predicated by, I believe, 15 inches of rain south of Elyria, as well as some other issues. Some dams failed, a couple other things were overtopped. So there was a reason why it flooded really bad back in I believe it was in the 70s. Or 60, was it 69, 70, somewhere in there? So nowadays we always require stormwater retention on our new subdivisions. So, you know, a lot of the growth that we've had over the years now take care of that issue. But this being in a floodplain, being next to the river, we're not requiring retention because of that reason, but we are requiring this with the water quality. But everything will be above the 617 is our requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Any other questions from the committee?
Yes,
Mr. Tedrow?
Just for engineering, John, have you seen anything that satisfies you moving forward? And I'm going back to the turning lane. That seems to be where my focus is on this. Have you seen anything in front of you that you would feel comfortable moving forward, approving this development as far as that turning lane, other than a traffic? I'm not happy moving forward just with a traffic, report.
In regards to the actual preliminary plan for the turning lane, I have no issues with as far as the length, the transition. It's pretty much laid out according to ODOT criteria. But until I have the full design, I won't know what all is needed. They do plan on adding on to the stone strong walls that we put in a number of years ago, as well as adding on to the ends of some of those. So those are very typical type of construction that we've used. So, I mean, they're just basically piggybacking what we've done so far. So at this time, I do not see anything that would strike any type of issues.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Oswald?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks for letting me speak. Of course, my turning lane is the question, and there are quite a few obstacles that are going to be having to take care of. I know one of them is this, the energy dissipator. As far as we're going to have to deal with that. We've got electric transformers, boxes, telephone poles, and of course you have to incorporate the new the stone retaining wall, whatever they decide to do. My question being is that there's an awful lot of stuff going on there, and I don't know who's going to be building this road. Normally, when the city will do a project, the city will put an engineer on site to make sure that all these steps are properly done. Is there going to be something that will be on our side that we're watching the process, or is that something that we'll hire? Can you explain maybe something how we know that when that road is done that it's going to be right? Thank you.
Thank you to you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the energy dissipator, I believe it's far enough off the road that they'll be able to just add on to the areas around it. Obviously, in the final design, it'll tell us whether it needs to be replaced or if they can utilize it. But until they do a final design, I won't know that. In regards to the who will be overseeing it, the engineering department will have somebody on site. We will oversee it one way or the other, whether it be in-house or we contract out. The water lines are ours, the sewer lines are ours. Everything on Golf Road is essentially ours, so we want to make sure everything's built according to our standards as well as ODOT as well. So, I mean, these are the type of things we look at.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So then, who will have the responsibility, and I agree with Mr. Florna, as far as how the traffic and construction time will be going on in phases? I agree there, but it is going to be an issue. Who's going to handle the cost of maybe whatever we have to do to caution people, put signs up? Is that something that it will be the city's responsibility or the contractor's responsibility? Thank you.
Traffic control will be ultimately the developers and the contractor's responsibility. It will be in a partnership with the city, so we will talk to the administration as well as far as what we allow and don't allow, whether it's work at night, whether it's maintain one way, whether it's close the whole thing down, whether it's keep the whole thing open. It will be a joint decision, but it will be done safely. That was the most important thing. We want to make sure it's done safely.
And then the last thing for the fire department, that road that will be the emergency access that will go through the golf course, is what type of material is that going to be? Do you know that, so that you're going to be confident that that access road's okay? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Preliminary plans that we received in November of last year, I don't know if they'll change, but at that time, they had taken our requirement that we needed a all-surface road, and so they will be putting in a ODOT-approved asphalt drive, and that has several base layers leading up to it. It will be, by design, able to support our 75,000-pound power ladder truck. So
Thank you.
Comfortable with that road has submitted. I think we're all worried about what if there's a flood, and chatted with the engineer that it would be quite amount of rain or whatever, a lot of things to go wrong, that 617 feet would be approached. So if you had any clarity on that, I'd turn that over to John if he wanted to expound on that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, concerns from the committee or the audience? Director Panowski?
This question is for legal counsel for the commission, Mr. Craig. I guess I'm asking for a little bit of clarity on the process here, because I'm struggling with considering 2023-1000097, as the chair indicated we are, which is a request for a new subdivision. When I sit here and look at all of these variances that would be necessary and considered after the fact, they would be part of the creation and the structure of the subdivision. I mean, every one of these variances is trying to grab a foot here and a foot there, and I think collectively they're unusual, or they're not similar to things that have been approved by this commission as a group, maybe individually in certain places, but it seems like the ask is to get everything they possibly can in this subdivision. So I struggle with approving or, understanding the process here is to vote for a new subdivision when I know all those things are on the horizon, because that in fact makes up the subdivision. And I have concerns about all those things as collectively they create the overall subdivision plan. And so can you, as far as the process goes, or maybe what we're supposed to be considering here, I'm struggling with that, quite frankly.
Sure. Through the chair, you can open up the discussion to include all these different variances, but the variances just can't be approved unless the subdivision's approved. So you can still discuss all of the variances and the requirements as part of your subdivision discussion, but they can't be approved until you approve the subdivision.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions for the commission? Mr. Schneider, I do have a couple, and I have one from Mr. Cohen. On item number 3, under utilities, you stated that the preliminary plans are incomplete and do not show sewers for the lower half of the subdivision or roadways between the upper and lower portions of the development. Since you wrote this report, has that changed? Is that something that you're going to need prior to this, or can this come after the fact?
Well, it's something we definitely need. It's something that's going to have to happen. The only question is, does Planning Commission want to see those plans or not, and how they're going to run the storm sewers? If you entrust it in us, we will make sure they're built, and it's built according to our standards. But if you'd like to see them as well, that's totally up to the commission as well.
Okay, thank you. And then to Mr. Corna, one of the sticking points for me, and Mr. Oswald touched on this, was this turning lane. And according to Engineer Schneider, we have preliminary plans, which he appears not to have any major concerns with. But preliminary is not final. When are the final plans going to be turned in for that turning lane?
I have my engineer here, and I'll let him address that. They were out there doing surveying, detailing, and I felt what was submitted was pretty close to final, we know 2 important factors. One was, does it require a retaining wall? And the answer is yes. And what is that design? They've come up with it. So I think that 90% of what you have is what's going to be built. There's probably some fine details in the end that would be part of what you would call finished construction drawings. But I think we're about 90% there with it. I'll let him answer that.
The name is Ed Piatek from Euthenix, 8235 Mohawk Drive in Strongsville, Ohio. I would say that we're probably about 90%. There is some additional information that we need, some additional field verification that we need to do. We need to verify some of the materials that are out there now. But I think in general, the concept that's been submitted is pretty sound. So I don't know that I really have a date for you. Is it going to be next week or the week after? I don't know that in particular, but there will be final plans that will be developed and submitted to the engineering department for approval.
Thank you. Mr. Anderko?
Yeah. Just to follow up with the actual plans, is it just in the construction design materials, or does the plan include lighting for that turn lane, or is there not a plan to light that area?
I guess that's a good question. I think I would say that off the top of my head, if it's lit now, it would remain lit. I mean, there would be, I don't know if there's regular street lights out on that segment of Gulf Road, but I guess that would be, something that the power company could be contacted to request lighting if there isn't lighting.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are street lights out there on the road as far as Ohio Edison services. There's also lights on the roadway into the Spring Valley that has been stolen by Spring Valley Country Club, but there are quite a few lights out there.
Okay. And then to the engineer there, so we're waiting on the final plans to be submitted. You get those submitted. I heard Mr. Corner's plan on his timeline on the build out there. When does this turning lane fall into that plan?
I don't have an answer for you right now. I'm not sure. I mean, there is some design that needs to be done. We haven't been authorized to do, final design at this point. We're taking, we have preliminary, we're here for preliminary. And I don't think that, final design is that far out. So, as far as the phasing goes, we would work with the city, with the engineering department, with the developer, and proposing a construction plan that would be, would satisfy everyone.
Thank you. And then another question for Mr. Corna. The same question actually is when do you see this lane being a part of your phase-in project?
I'm sorry, you have to repeat that.
When do you see this? I heard the engineer speak, he's waiting on approval to go out to the full design. when do you plan on, when is your thought process a part of your phase of when this lane's going to be turned in? Are you talking August, September, December?
Here's our plan, which we hope we can fulfill. We need to get, this is preliminary approval that we're getting, and they have to do final engineering on the entire project. That's the roads to order for us to begin construction. We hope we can be out for bid sometime in July. So the plans will be ready in July, and here's why. We plan on starting we want to close the golf course early, probably end of September, so we can start construction exclusively on the development. Of course, there's a couple things involved with that closing. Is we need to be able to get paving in by next May. So it means all the undergrounds have to be done over the winter, weather permitting, and paving will start in the spring, probably about this time next year. There's a couple things that we're facing that is with Harvanian and their schedule. What everybody's got to realize, what's happening in the housing industry, it changed from when we started this. Interest rates are pretty high right now, and they think they'll come down. But construction costs haven't stopped going this way. So we're fighting both those to make this project happen. That's why it's very, very important to us to be able to get our plans done so we can start this fall. So the onus is on us to make sure we can get it done for you quickly. And they are prepared once they get preliminary approval, and they're scheduled to stay 100% on our project to get it ready so we can give submittals sometime this summer and be able to actually start. We could bid it out this summer and actually start physically moving dirt in September. That's the plan. And hopefully that'll happen. And again, we are facing some outside stuff, and it's election year and interest rates, and, but there is a market still there for what we want to do. It's just a little break in interest rates, and hopefully costs don't go like this again, and they level off and stay leveled off, and we all should be fine. So I think the other thing that's different today, a year ago, it was almost impossible to put a subdivision in on time because everybody was busy. You couldn't buy pipe. It took a year to get hydrants. That has eased up. So at least we know right now we're in a better position to be able to build and get the materials and get quality contractors that'll come in and do the work. So we feel we're going to be pretty good with the schedule. Time changes everything, but it seems like we're in a good spot right now to move forward. And we really appreciate anything you guys can help us with as far as helping us getting approvals done, and we will do whatever we have to do to satisfy engineering, fire, and everyone on the planning side of it. Euthenix is an excellent engineer, and I'm sure they're going to do whatever they can to satisfy the engineering department.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Hubbard.
Just a general comment, and I guess this kind of follows in with what Mr. Pianowski said. It seems like we're being asked to consider a subdivision that is contingent upon a large number of additional variances and that sort of stuff, that when looking at the reports overall, paint a picture of a subdivision that every time you need a mitigation to go one way, it goes the other way. I mean, like, we're being asked to put in or approve a subdivision at this point and later look at variances, but if I'm understanding things right, it would be with smaller driveways and that might force traffic onto the roads, but smaller roads that we can't safely operate because we need those to maintain for a fire lane, or like, maybe there'd be additional parking, but we've also asked for a variance that says less public space. It just seems like all of those together puts it into a hard spot to say, can the subdivision go where they're talking, at least as currently envisioned, absent at least some discussion of how those variances work together and impact putting it there.
Thank you. Mr. Craig, would you like to comment?
Sure, you can certainly discuss these variances that are before the board as part of this the preliminary subdivision plan. You just can't vote to approve them until after preliminary subdivision, if it's approved. So it certainly should open up the discussion with regard to each one of these variances to see if this is something that the city would be interested in pursuing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Craig. So I will do that. We'll open up, as far as the larger picture of the new subdivision request, the several variances that are on the docket, keeping in mind, as Mr. Craig said, we will not be voting on those as a part of this, but it is a part of the vote for the subdivision request. So I will open that up to Mr. Farkas, if you could touch base on a couple of ones that are reflective to the building code.
I can respond to the ones for the zoning code. In regards to the open space requirement, that was a discussion of the chicken and the egg scenario. As Mr. Pianowski said, if we're going to theoretically approve a subdivision, but yet it goes for the open space requirement of 30% and that we're denied, the concern could be, why do you approve the subdivision and deny the variance? So vice versa. But Mr. Craig has indicated that that's where we can move forward. That concern number one is right out of the gate of that 30% requirement. They're utilizing the adjacent spaces as part of that 30 space open requirement, meaning if this were an independent subdivision all its own, it would not comply with that open space requirement. Moving on to the driveway width request, many of these lots are reduced in size from that of what the code requires, meaning they wouldn't comply out of the gate with the driveway width requirement. They have put on their plans to have an 18-foot wide driveway in lieu of a smaller one, triggering a blanket variance request. Number 3 indicates a side yard setback of 5'6". For the development requirements, it's 6 foot minimum. This is not an uncommon request for other subdivisions. It does help get a bigger bang for the buck of the land use, but again, it creates a higher density for the buildings. You pack more in. I did caution the panel years ago when this came across of when you do get a structure that's so close to one another, the residential code of Ohio kicks in regards to setbacks. Our residential code says anything less than 5 feet triggers fire rating. They're at 5'6". So during construction, if a lot is constructed out of square, you're going to have a portion of that building that's much closer than the 5'6" mark. So far, we have not had any concerns arise because the surveyors have been on point, assuring that these are where they should be. And if it does, it will trigger another variance because it would be contrary if this is approved. Number 4, the plans indicate a proposed rear yard setback of 11 feet on the north and south portion of Palmer Court. The plans also state that a 9-foot easement on each side will provide the required minimum 20-foot setback. That again is a unique situation of where it's not typical. A lot of contractors design their setbacks to be either greater or at the minimum 20-foot setback. This is taking into account, again, the adjacent space to account for that requirement. I indicate that the lift stations proposed in the subdivision require a separate review from Design Review Board, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Mr. Farkas. Ms. Scott?
No additional comment.
Engineer Schneider?
In regard, you wanted to, in regards to all the variances? Obviously, our ordinances state that the roadway width is supposed to be 28 feet. That's measured back of curb to back of curb. Typically, curbs are right around the 6 inches in width. That has been a standard for years. Planning Commission has allowed other subdivisions to reduce down to the 26 feet 1 inch. Previously, the developer was pushing for 24 foot. That would not allow any parking out there. It's nice to see that it came up to 26.1 as now we can allow parking. I'm the type of person, though, I still like to have the 28 foot. It's obviously it's safer, but I leave that to the commission as far as whether you want to pursue that or not. In regards to sidewalks, our ordinances state that sidewalks are supposed to be on both sides of the road. I'm a firm believer in that. One of the things council passed in 2014, they passed a resolution in support of complete streets. One of the items with the complete street is sidewalks. Depending on the type of people you have out there living in these areas, mailboxes nowadays are all gang box style, so if you want to walk down to your mailbox, you don't want to walk in the road. So one of the sides will have sidewalks. Once again, happier that we have sidewalks now where before we had no sidewalks. Rather see two sidewalks because of the, you never know the challenges of crossing the road for whoever's living there, whether it be an elderly lady or a handicapped person that requires, a little more assistance. But once again, happy that we have sidewalks on one side, but prefer two. I believe those are the only two that I have in regards to engineering.
That it?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Assistant Chief Gall.
Yeah, through you, Chair. The variance request that most affects us would be the highway plan, street width, Elyria Codified Ordinance 115.04. Talks about the roadway section. All concrete pavement shall have an overall minimum width of 28 feet, back to back of curb, and a minimum thickness of 8 inches. It goes on to talk about the base of the street, how it's built up. My comments would be on this, that he's requesting a 26 feet 1 inch street, which includes the full curb, back-to-back measurement. From those plans I talked about in November of 23, this design incorporates a 2-foot curb and gutter on each side. So the actual drivable road is 22 feet 1 inch. Elyria Fire Department's Tower 8, 35-ton aerial apparatus. When we use it, it deploys outriggers. The total footprint then for this truck in its setup position, 20 feet, which in effect would block this road. A width of 28 feet creates space for vehicle passage. From a fire prevention standpoint, I am against the construction of streets less than the 28 feet width. Should the commission approve a street, which they have in the past at 26-1, I would request a smooth incline or a mountable curb of some sort. Some call it a rolling curb, be installed. This would allow some use of the curb. How do they come up with the 26 feet 1? Well, a fire lane by code is 20 feet. A typical American car is at 6 feet, so 26 feet pretty much means that you have no parking. You get the 1 inch that allows some parking. But, realize too, people use cars that aren't always typical. They have paneled vans, possibly trucks or delivery vehicles that are much wider than the 6 feet. So that's hence the 28 feet that I am in favor of in supporting the code. Should the commission decide 26-1 is acceptable, no parking signs shall be posted along one side of the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Gall. Any questions or comments from the commission?
I have a question for legal counsel. We're going to vote on each one of these individually as we go through, or are we going to vote on this entire? So if we approve the new subdivision, then are we going to line item each one of these as we go?
The way the new subdivision was submitted includes these, the need for these variances.
All right.
So you'd vote, basically you'd be voting all together.
Okay, all right. That makes it easy.
Mr. Craig, I have a question in regards to that. If the subdivision were not to pass? Do we go on to the variances?
No.
Okay, so if it were not to pass, what would be the next step? Could that be resubmitted in another way, or does that make this project null and void, for lack of better terminology?
Mr. Chairman, if the subdivision does not pass, then this application is terminated with a negative decision. They could always come back and resubmit a new application with new different requirements, or they could go through the appeals process if they choose to do so with regard to this subdivision.
Okay.
Angelo Corna, Villas of the Valley.
I'll recognize you when I'm done here. Thank you. Mr. Craig, would you like to finish?
No, I was done.
There you go, Mr.
Angelo Corna, Villas of the Valley Development, 20575 Center Ridge Road, Rocky River. The way that we had submitted the application was, one is just being a new subdivision. So our application shows that as one fee paid. We have multiple variance requests that are separate applications, separate fees we paid. So we would like to ask the commission to vote on just the subdivision itself, and then go one by one to the individual variances. In order for the project to proceed, we don't need every variance. It could still happen. So, for example, the open space would be the first variance we'd have to address here, which would be the overall golf course being included. We would like you to consider that on its own. And then moving forward, the streets, they could be changed, the sidewalks could be changed. Those are things that could be modified. But as a whole, we are asking you to vote on just the subdivision itself and the variances individually.
Thank you. Another question? Yeah. Mr. Podolsky?
This is more just from my understanding. Why sidewalks on only one side of the street? Other than saving the actual installation of the sidewalks and the concrete, what's the purpose there?
The original plan didn't have any sidewalks, the original plan. And they asked us to include sidewalks. And with our setbacks and everything that was being worked out, it was best to move the sidewalks to one side. And it seemed like everybody was kind of in acceptance of that. And then since we're widening the road from originally what it was, 2 feet wider, it just made sense that one side was fine. If we need to put a second sidewalk in, we had considered what's called a hiking trail that would go behind the units. There would be a walking trail, because we're going to have a connection up to the parks up the hill, and we're going to have hiking trails within the project. So we would use the hiking trails as the second sidewalk means. And that's how, if it became an issue, we would end up solving it by putting in the hiking trails. The other thing that there's that variance on the setback of 6 feet on the lower units. That can easily be solved, it's just a time issue, by just taking the property, instead of doing it as an easement, we could just add that property to our project. So we would just replot it. That's all we would have to do, and we can meet that. Right now, it's a golf course that has trees, and the golf course doesn't want us to cut the trees down, so we kind of left that area for them to keep. But if we had to, we could just take that land and add it. We don't need the 18-foot driveway width. It's not a requirement. The driveways are designed to be 16. So, but there are certain cases where Harvanian people ask for a wider driveway, and then we don't have to come in for a variance each time. So we talked about it with Mr. Farkas. The best thing to do is just ask for the blanket variance now, so we have to keep coming back. The other issue is the 1 foot additional on the side yard requirements for the Harvanian homes. The reason that we asked for the extra foot, and again, it was brought up by zoning, is sometimes when they build these units, you know, they don't build them exact. You know, they're like 2 inches off, 3 inches off. So they're constantly being bombarded with variances because nobody's perfect in building them. So the extra foot is there. Their biggest unit is 39 feet. So they can make it work without having the 1 foot variance. And the only reason that we're asking for that is kind of suggestion from zoning, so you don't have that issue where the units aren't exactly right and they're 6 inches off or 2 inches off. That's the only reason for that. But we can live with not having to do that. We just have to come in for a variance if there's a mistake made.
I was just asking about sidewalks.
Pardon me?
I was just asking about the sidewalk, so.
Yeah, well,
I
the
think you've
sidewalk,
answered, that has to do
sidewalk
again with
issue is-
spacing and setbacks and all that. So it is a strategic decision along with everything else you've asked for here having to do with spacing and setbacks and everything else. So that's, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah.
Again, it was on purpose because of spacing, essentially.
yeah, making the
So, okay.
setbacks work, and that was
Very
the
good.
key part. Because we had to widen the road a couple feet, and then putting everything together into a composite, it just made it more sense to just go on one side.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the commission? All right. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and read the request. It's 2023-10097, Villas of the Valley, 1100 Gulf Road, Elyria, Ohio, 44035, requesting for a new subdivision. Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Battle. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Seeing as there's no second, this will we can't move forward, correct, Mr. Craig, without a second?
That's correct.
So the motion will die without a second. So, Mr. Craig, from the proponent's point of view, what is the next step for this?
The matter remains pending before Planning Commission until Planning Commission's ready to make a vote. We need a motion and a second in order to take a vote to either approve it or deny it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hubbard?
No, I at this point would second it to put it before the panel and have a vote on it.
So Mr. Battle has made a motion, and Mr. Hubbard has made a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Mr. Anderko?
I would like to understand, are we still just only voting on 100097, or are they being separated like they were asked?
We'll be voting on 10097, and then provided that, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Craig, provided that passes the commission, then we'll move on to the next round of variances individually. Is that correct? Any other questions? So I have a motion, and I have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay?
Nay.
Motion has failed. So, Mr. Craig, I don't believe we can move on to the balance of these variances, is that correct?
Right, we don't have there's no subdivision, so there's no variances. I understand that the applicant would like the commission to give it some direction as far as whether or not it would be willing to consider these variances, but it's up to the chair. And there's no point in, there's nothing to grant because there's no subdivision.
Okay. Well, I will speak for myself. I think there was a couple of questions or I'll speak for the commission based on some of the discussion I had. There were some concerns brought up by the building department, the engineer, and actually the fire department in regards to some of these variances here. And I know Mr. Corner was welcoming to making some adjustments to this, to his variance request, which probably played a role into the denial here. So my thought process is to have a better understanding from the commission on what specific issues they may have, so that we can forward those to Mr. Corner. Is that an appropriate way to address it, Mr. Craig?
That's fair, yes.
Okay. So if the commission would, in a timely manner, please submit to Mrs. Tomsky, or Ms. Tomsky, our secretary, the concerns that you may have on these, particularly these variances, so that we can share those with Mr. Corner, so that if he chooses, he could resubmit the subdivision request and then move on to these variances. Is that okay? Does the commission understand that?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
So, we will move on, since we cannot, handle the next few variances, we'll move on to item number 8, the planning commission cases. There are none. There's a summary reports of design review applications that have been approved by design review staff. Ms. Scott, is there anything you'd like to address on either one of those 3 items?
Through you, there's no additional comment. We are starting to see an uptick in these applications, with the warmer weather coming, so we'll keep you posted on those requests.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the commission in regards to those reports? Item number 10 is staff and commission reports. Anybody else from the commission or the departments? Okay, before we adjourn, I would like to thank Mr. Farkas, Ms. Scott, Mr. Schneider, and Assistant Chief Gall for their help and the support. And so I thank you for your efforts in those. Seeing as no further business, our next meeting will be April 2nd, 2024. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Panowski.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bell. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.